I'm James Miller, and my role is Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at Glasgow Caledonian University. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you, not just to this particular event, but wherever you are in the world, virtually welcome you to Glasgow and to COP26. I'm delighted that today's event does form a key part of the university's contribution to the COP26 discussions. As the University for the Common Good, and indeed the only university in Scotland to have achieved EcoCampus Platinum status, we are deeply committed to sustainability. And we are on the forefront of tackling the climate emergency through our cutting-edge research and education, which builds on proud tradition of supporting communities locally and internationally to deliver social impact. Nearly 5 years ago, we were one of the first universities in the world to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals issued by the United Nations as a framework for our research strategy. These critical interrelated goals are also embedded in our teaching through our Common Good curriculum for all undergraduate students, through which we encourage our students to become socially accountable global citizens using their skills, knowledge and values to contribute to a more sustainable, inclusive and just world. Today's event will focus on addressing sustainable goals in the fashion industry through education and employability. The purpose is to educate as well as to engender discussion from the panel members around issues surrounding the movement towards a more sustainable fashion future in the wider sense, including design, raw materials, supply chain, retail, and waste, in order to engage with the current sustainability reputation that the fashion industry holds, to look at ways of improving the sustainability record, and by the same token, creating new job profiles, which will become the fashion jobs of the future and will be integrated into the education provision of the future in this area. The discussion will highlight sustainability at the heart of employability criteria for the fashion industry. The members of the panel will address the environmental issues that fashion currently faces, focusing on shifting the industry towards looking for solutions, excuse me, and focusing on four main challenges: innovation in sustainable raw materials, challenges in procurement, creative means of calculating environmental impact, and focus for sustainability in educational provision for enhancement of employability. Through this creativity, we want to encourage envisaging solutions to work towards changing mindsets and processes, to creating prospects for new ways of doing things, and finally to give rise to new and enhanced industry profiles, education and employment opportunities, which will nurture scalable, sustainable solutions. I'm very sorry that I'm not going to be able to join you for the whole of your session, as other competing commitments mean I need to be elsewhere. I do wish you well for a great event. Be bold in your thinking, be creative in your solutions. Future generations are depending on us all being ambitious in our achievements. So welcome and enjoy your session.
Thank you very much, James. Really great, as I've said, for James to be involved in this, and indeed the rest of the speakers. I like the comment there at the end, James, creative in our solutions, and that's what we're really looking for from the audience here, to put in the chat as we're going through the presentations, some maybe solutions, not just identifying the problems, but how we can actually help to resolve these problems. So I'd like to introduce our speakers on the panel. And the first person I'd like to introduce is Mark Hogarth, who's the Creative Director for Harris Tweed Hebrides. And as well as being an honorary graduate from GCU and also part of our GCU SFES panel, he's also a council member for the Campaign for Wool. So Mark, if you'd like to introduce yourself now for a minute.
Hello, my name is Mark Hogarth, as Bob said. I'm Creative Director for Harris Tweed Hebrides, which is the largest mill on the Hebridean Islands. We are obviously part of the Harris Tweed industry, which has been going for over 170 years. It was formalised through the Harris Tweed Authority back in 1910, so that's been going for more than 100 years as well. Harris Tweed has got an incredible sustainable profile. It is hand-woven at the home of the weaver, using virgin wool in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And those three tenets are sacrosanct. They're at the heart of the industry, an industry which seeks not for profit or expansion, but rather to hold the industry in trust for the future generations of the people of the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. I've been very fortunate to work in the industry for over 14 years. Further to that, I have an interest in sustainability through my position in the Campaign for Wool, where we have the primary objective to increase the profile of wool and increase its usage on the high street and online from a very, very basic level of 2%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'd like to introduce our second panellist, and this is Dr. Lindsey Drylie Carey, who's a Principal Investigator for Sustainable Fashion Employability Skills, our Erasmus partnership. Lindsey has been working in the university for a number of years. She has a PhD in the area of ethical consumption and consumer psychology. Lindsey, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. As Bob says, I have a PhD in ethical consumption, and that's an area that I'm really interested in. I'm also a senior lecturer in the Department of Fashion, Marketing, Tourism and Events at GCU, and I'm the lead investigator in the Sustainable Fashion Employability Skills Project, which is really one of the main reasons why this panel has been put together. And I'm just really delighted and extremely grateful to be able to participate in this discussion, which is on such an interesting and topical area, and to be with such great people alongside it. So I just hope that that you enjoy the event, and please, participate as much as you can, because that makes the debate very lively. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. Our next person in the panel is from across the water. Dr. Nuria Llobregat is the International Affairs Director and Core Officer at Enhance Alliance from the Universitat Politècnica de Valencia. Nuria, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Good evening. My name is Nuria Llobregat. I'm the core officer at the Enhance Alliance for Universitat Politècnica de Valencia. Enhance Alliance is the joint of 7 leading universities of technology, which aim is to build one campus with no borders, where our students can move freely and create their own learning path that will drive transformation in society and science. As you can imagine, from many points of view, it is quite a challenge, but also a big opportunity. Here, industry and education have a new scenario to join together and foster sustainable employability skills that will ensure new green talent entering industry. So for industry and education, the discussion is mandatory. Because in this new scenario, industry has more than 228,000 potential talents to champion sustainability, a challenge that we can turn into a needed opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nuria. Now I'd like to introduce a student member of the panel. The student is Greg Paton, who's a PhD student at Glasgow Caledonian University, who's researching fast fashion. And Greg started his PhD very recently in October 2021, but we're delighted to introduce Greg.
Thank you, Bob. Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Paton, and I'm a first-year PhD student at Glasgow Caledonian University. I also recently completed my Masters in International Fashion Marketing at GCU this year. As Bob said, my PhD is very much in its infancy at the moment, and the aim of my research is to ultimately reduce the vast quantities of textile waste being sent to landfills by developing strategies that will hopefully help consumers to understand the environmental impact of their fast fashion disposal behaviours. And I'm very excited to be here today.
Thank you very much, Greg. And now we have Jill Farrell, Director of Customer Education and Communications at Zero Waste Scotland. And Jill has been leading on the Deposit Return Scheme, which is a national initiative that aims to incentivise the recycling of drinks bottles and cans and change people's behaviour towards waste. Jill.
Hi, I think Greg and I are going to become firm friends because your PhD topic is pretty much what we wrestle with on a daily basis at Zero Waste Scotland. So hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this afternoon's session, and apologies for my lighting. It's the first time since the clock went back that I've been on a call this late, so I'll need to look at that. Anyway, Zero Waste Scotland is an organisation that's funded by the Scottish Government, and our mission is zero waste in Scotland, including the title, but that will be achieved by adopting the principles of the circular economy. So rather than the old linear economy, which is take, use, dispose, it's looking at a world where all resources are considered more holistically. And fashion is a fantastic example of how the circular economy can really help to drive change. So rather than using renewable materials as your raw materials, what are the alternatives that can be used? Designing products and services, designing products that can be remanufactured, that can be reused, designing for longevity, and how Tweed is obviously a fantastic example of that. But also looking at different business models, so leasing clothes rather than buying them, being able to resell, buy on clothes. And then at the very end of life, looking at the recyclability of those materials. And as Greg said, making sure that everything possible is done to avoid going to landfill at any point, or incineration, or whatever other smart ways of disposing things are out there. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening in Scotland and internationally. And what a great panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Our next speaker is Ignacio Sierra, and he has worked for more than 20 years in Tendam, which is present, it's a fashion retailer present in more than 70 countries with 2,000 stores and more than 140 years of history. Ignacio.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you very much, GCU and our colleagues in the European Erasmus Plus program of employability skills and sustainability. Tendam is, as you mentioned, a company which has been working in the sector for many years, and at this moment has 8 brands, 5 brands which have been growing in sustainable products, and 3 new ones, which has been launched recently last year, ranging from 30% to 100% of sustainable, more sustainable product to our offer. We think we have a strong responsibility in improving the field in which we are playing. We have more than 20 million members of our loyalty clubs, which is a very strong commitment with our brands, but also with our behavior and the quality. We do fight constantly in order to get a much better fashion field, a more available sustainable product, a better way to design our products, and a better way to start the conversation with the customer about what is quality and what is a better way of using fashion. We are positioning in the premium mass market and in general terms, but at the end of the day in the mass market, which we do think we do impact the most. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. And last but not least, I'm delighted that we have Richard Dictus, who's president at Amorfi. Prior to that, he's had 33 years, and I couldn't believe this when I read this, 33 years of experience in the UN, spanning 5 continents and 11 assignments. And Amorfi is the leading global business association for open and sustainable trade. So Richard. You're on mute, Richard.
Sorry about that, slight hiccup. So I have the honor at this moment of being the president at amfori. Amfori is an organization that has been around for a very long period of time. It started originally as the Free Trade Association during the startup days of the European Union, and when the European Union was developing its first trade agreements for the whole of European countries. Since then, in the early 2000s, it started to develop the first social compliance auditing standards and processes for that later on in 2010 started to expand also into environment with an environmental program. At this moment, amfori has about 2,400 members with a market value of about $1.5 trillion a year. And therefore, our members can move the world. And from that perspective, it's really, really important that we continue to work with the members and the members with us on that whole issue of sustainability, how trade can be given a purpose, how you can make sure that there's free trade volume so that there is prosperity across the world, but at the same time that you work on the social impact, that you work on the environmental impact, and that you work on the climate change impact in a process of continuous improvement, so that business can adjust to the new realities and the new standards that we are uncovering. And hopefully I'll be able to explain a little bit more about that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I hope the audience agrees that we've got such a great range of experience and expertise from across the sector to answer the questions. So now on to the first question, and we've divided the questions into a couple of different sections. First part being part of the movement, and the second is being part of the change. So the first question is going to be addressed to Mark from Harris Tweed. And Mark, we've got a big question to start off with. What does sustainability in fashion mean to you and your company?
Well, we have been aware of the term sustainability for quite some time. Harris Tweed goes back to the 19th century, as I pointed out in my opening remarks. But there it was a survival dynamic, you know. Sheep were in availability. There was weaving skills that were left over as a legacy from the Nordic people that had been in the Outer Hebrides several centuries before. And Harris Tweed was there as a functional item to protect from the rain and indeed the heavy wind that you get in the northwest of Scotland. So even before fashion was there, it was about function. But so many items of fashion, as Ignacio will point out, it's about function first, and then you get the fashion element second. And that was the classic dynamic of Harris Tweed. Now, when it winding on decade after decade, the tweed was made so well that it became, you know, very popular in the 30s and 40s. And at that point, there was a durability element because of where it's from. To give you a small anecdote, for example, one of the biggest propellers for Harris Tweed in the post-war sector was the Ivy League universities. And that was because these privileged students, albeit they were being educated in rather large and cold buildings in New England. And of course, function prevailed over fashion. But because they look good and because the tweed is so beautifully made, the aesthetic of Harris Tweed, the fine design, the fact that it is hand woven, these all came together that propelled Harris Tweed into the fashion industry. So it almost was by accident, but by an accident of a quality of provenance and a quality of the actual finished garments themselves. What is important with Harris Tweed is durability. That is what propelled it to where it is today as a brand. There used to be a joke, about, the fact that you could buy a Harris Tweed jacket and that would be the one that would last you a lifetime. And that was actually a problem in a way, because back in the 1970s and 80s with globalization, we didn't have any element of planned obsolescence. So, there was a limit, but that problem of limited demand, if you like, is obviously now a big advantage, because we've got a really authentic, sustainable story, which is that we make a product, we make it well, and we're very fortunate to have great brand partners from Japan to Colombia to the United States and all over Europe, which take Harris Tweed and make it into wonderful products. Sustainability, obviously, is a word which means everything, to the point that it can sometimes mean nothing. For us, it is about sustaining a heritage industry in what is quite often a fragile socio-economic community. It is about focusing on that community where there's a beautiful synergy between the people, the product, and the place. And it's about maintaining that for the future. Taking sustainability into the wider context, we hope that we can give an example about how, when you work very closely with your environment and you put the onus on making a quality product and doing that in line with the ethics and the values of your existing community, then you can actually do something that goes beyond just making a simple product and can actually be valued for generations to come.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. We've got so many different questions to go through. I'm not going to make any comments until the end about each individual speaker. So I'm just going to go on to the next question now. And this is for Lindsey. What kind of fashion education do you think is needed now, Lindsey?
Okay, thank you, Bob. So yeah, definitely, as we all know, education is at the base of any change in society. And here in Glasgow, we're very much confronted with what's happening with the COP26, and there's no denying that we're in a situation of climate change, and therefore that the fashion industry has to address this. I think as fashion educators, or anybody that's exchanging knowledge in the area of fashion or allied areas, we have a responsibility for two things. First of all, for looking at what's happening in the market at the moment, and sometimes these processes and things are damaging to the environment, and also to try and look at ways at which we can do things a little bit better and differently and propose solutions. And the project that I'm leading, the Sustainable Fashion project that I'm leading, is really about doing that, because it's bringing together this European network of universities, industry partners, and we're all led by the same concern about sustainability and a practical approach to it. So it's a project that where we want to translate best practice and new ways of doing things into taking sustainability into account, into graduate skills, competencies, and knowledge. And we're going to do that through two different ways, by producing a white paper, but also a toolkit, which will have learning tools and which will be open in a repository, and will be open to educators, teachers, people who are dealing, trainers in that area, and who'll be able to apply those tools and disseminate more sustainable ways of approaching things across higher education in general. So I think fashion education just now, what's needed now is to embed sustainability within the provision in as many areas as we possibly can. We're not alone in doing that, but we're very much part of the movement of trying to address that issue.
Okay, and maybe a very quick one, given that you haven't used up all your 5 minutes. With a magic wand, which one element of fashion's future would you change?
So this is a really interesting one for me, because I'm really interested in shopping habits, and I would like to be able to address shopping habits, specifically the overconsumption that sometimes comes with online shopping habits. Now, what I mean here is, if you've got an event and you're wanting to buy an outfit, and you buy maybe 2 or 3 outfits, and you get them all, try them on, and you send 3 back and to keep the one that you like. What happens to those ones that go back? Sometimes they go back into the process or the retail, but sometimes they go straight into landfill. And I think that that's something, if I could change something, it would be the attitudes of consumers towards that. And also from an industry perspective, there is some, I know that there are some companies that are trying to address those issues of overconsumption. Like, for example, there's a company in Glasgow called ACS who take back the goods and sanitize them and put them back in to the system for brands. But I think we really need to address it from both perspectives, from the consumer perspective and for industry trying to find solutions to address those areas. So that's my magic wand.
That's great. Always good to see a magic wand. Thanks very much for that, Lindsey. And linked into that, Nuria, I'd like to go on to you. What's the future of higher education when it's not restricted by geographical boundaries, do you think?
Well, it's a good question. But with the eruption of digitalization and the resilience that institutions like UPB had to bring into the scene from nothing due to COVID, higher education, it's not restricted by geographical barriers anymore, but by laws and policies that are still regulating models that do not contemplate these sudden eruptions, neither the new professional skills that industry is demanding. COVID made that universities like UPB had to open themselves to new hybrid and digital spaces to teach, meet, to manage and rule it, even also to take important decisions out of the box just in a few days. This thinking out of the box helped to realize even more how important it is to have social contact, but at the same time, that physical restriction is not a problem anymore. Like today, we bring in ideas into this fantastic panel from different parts of the world without moving from our home's institutions to create synergies that both industry and education needs if we really want to pursue excellence in our students and your future workforce. And that's amazing. So if different educational institutions build, like enhance, a common knowledge space using innovative methodologies and transversal services, the future of higher education will be set on new learning and open spaces with no borders anymore, multidisciplinary, inclusive, diverse, sustainable, international, global, and with a modern administration. These new learning spaces avoid real, geographical and national law barriers, different local regulations, bureaucracy, problems that our students must face when trying to improve their brain talent that the society needs, and indeed the problems that industry faces when trying to communicate us their demands. From the educational point of view, alliances are amazing deep knowledge opportunities because the new degrees are elaborated and grounded from the best practices, lining up the new workforce demands, the best of the old teaching models, and the new learning tools. The new learning paths must consider the new and visual learning formats that our students are already using and must include the professional skills that industry is already identifying and demanding. For example, sudden new ways to communicate with clients, even to satisfy clients' needs that live and express themselves in social media environments, as fashion industry knows better than anyone, require out-of-the-box thinking from the different perspectives. Enhanced Alliance is working on 3 cluster topics: digitalization, smart cities, and climate action, with the aim of building a purpose-driven community using technological and scientific perspective that will help to turn global challenges into meaningful opportunities. And here, the industry, the fashion industry, has a lot to say. Enhance One Campus can share educational expertise and of their 7 university partners with the industry, and the industry can share their employability needs to better pursue our common goal, sustainable actions for a desired green society. Together, as a community of knowledge, we can facilitate and agree on skills and competencies that will help to enhance students' employability employability, contributing therefore to create smart and sustainable cities and societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nuria. Perfect timing. And I'd like to now pass on to a student's perspective in terms of the type of skills. So Greg, what do you think is the most relevant skills for employability related to sustainability, which you think should be highlighted in fashion courses, given you've come through both 2 undergraduate courses and you're now doing your PhD?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Bob. Thank you. Well, I would say that having the ability and the knowledge to identify strategic opportunities within fashion businesses is a key employability skill that links directly to sustainability. And if fashion graduates understand sustainable business practices, then this should enable them to spot strategic opportunities that will positively contribute towards sustainability efforts within the fashion industry. So if we were to consider a fast fashion company looking to reduce, say, their carbon emissions, for example, fashion graduates who have a strong understanding of sustainable business practices may find an opportunity to reduce carbon emissions significantly within that organisation. And this may include perhaps moving the production of fashion garments closer to the end consumer, which should in turn significantly reduce transportation-related emissions. And I also think actually that being able to track and analyse the results of sustainability efforts over time is another key skill that should be highlighted in fashion courses, because this will enable fashion graduates to measure the success of a brand's sustainability efforts and then be able to communicate this through some form of data visualization. And given that the fashion industry is under intense scrutiny to be more sustainable, I feel that these skills will be crucial for future graduates to have.
Perfect, Greg. I'm going to ask you a supplementary question as well. If I was a student and I was considering doing a fashion-related course at university, what advice would you give me in relation to sustainability?
It would be to, first of all, practice what you preach. So the student would really need to have a core understanding of sustainability and also practice sustainability. So as well as purchasing new, perhaps explore purchasing from a rental service or perhaps secondhand. So definitely if you're going to be a fashion student and focus on sustainability, then you really do need to be part of the movement and be practicing what you preach.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Greg. Great timing. And as you said, part of the movement. Practicing what you preach is so important for our students, and being an academic that was involved in waste management, I felt it's so important for practicing and helping the university lead in terms of managing its waste management practices. So I'd now like to move forward towards being part of the change. So I'd like to bring Jill back in and as part of the impact element. So Jill, how do you think we are in Scotland when it comes to sustainability at the moment? If you can talk about fashion, but I know your focus will be much wider than that. So how are we doing in relation to fashion primarily?
Well, you know, as you guys will know better than I do, over the last 20 years, clothing production has doubled internationally, which means that the carbon impact of clothes manufacturing is now about 10% of the world's carbon emissions. And if we continue the way we are at the moment, that's likely to be around 25% by 2050. So that means that the clothing industry's carbon impact is more than international flights and maritime shipping combined. So that's not a very comfortable place to be when consumers are thinking more and more about their carbon impact and what they can do. In Scotland, we tend to generate around 170,000 tonnes of textiles waste every year. And we know that people are, you know, buying lots of clothes that don't actually get used, don't get worn. The average UK household, I think, spends about £4,000, has about £4,000 worth of clothing in their house, 30% of which isn't used. So, you know, from a consumer, from a personal point of view, that's not a very smart place to be either. So the good news is there's lots of initiatives in play in Scotland. Zero Waste Scotland has been working with Skills Development Scotland to develop a circular economy skills hub. And that's working with academia, colleges, universities, and schools to help understand the principles of the circular economy and how those can be applied to different disciplines, different situations. So that's looking at things like systems thinking, critical thinking, design principles, and how we can just think differently about, as I said earlier, that traditional take, use, dispose, looking more at what's the overall impact of these resources that we're using, and how do we make sure that we can maximize their life cycle. Glasgow City Council just last week, I'm sure it's no coincidence it's in the run up to COP26, has announced the Clyde Future Fashion Park. And that's an initiative that will be developed on the banks of the River Clyde, and looking at manufacturing high quality, high tech apparel for the UK, and have an innovation component there along the lines of the innovation park that's out beside Glasgow Airport at the moment. So major brands, major manufacturers collaborating in areas of non-competitive spaces to come up with solutions that can be rolled out. And Lindsey was talking earlier about the challenges that there are at the moment around the online shopping behaviours. Hopefully we'll come on to it later, but there's a lot of work looking at behaviour change in consumers. Generally, people and businesses want to do the right thing. Greg was talking earlier about reporting. I think there's a lot that we can do to inform people about what are the right decisions to make from a carbon reduction perspective. But then it's putting in place the infrastructure to make that as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. And things like carbon reporting at COP26, the carbon impact of the food being served was displayed alongside or on the menus. Could we get to that stage in the fashion industry where when you're buying something, there's actually a carbon cost that's associated with it? So it just lets people make a decision based on the most relevant and available information. ACS was mentioned earlier, which is a business that we've worked with. We've also worked with leasing companies like Graceful Changes, which rents clothing, children's clothing, and Cioda in Stirling, who have been renting clothing to the COP26 delegates. And in terms of making things as easy as possible, Zero Waste Scotland has developed the Revolve brand, which is working with second-hand clothing stores. And my colleague Sam will probably hunt me down and shoot me for calling them second-hand clothing stores, because it's moving away from thinking that second-hand, but pre-loved, pre-owned, but having a shopping experience that is comparable with being in a modern retail environment. So taking away some of that stigma around buying things that have been owned by other people, and also making it a more pleasant retail experience. And we have hundreds of retailers who are signed up to the Revolve network. So there's a lot of really good things happening at the moment across a whole range of Scottish society, be that policy. The Scottish Government in Programme for Government has made a commitment to a textiles fund. What the scale and scope of that fund is going to be hasn't been crystallised yet, but government is looking at this. Academia is heavily involved and very active across a whole range of aspects. And of course, businesses are driving a lot of this because consumers are making demands for changes. So it's not a terribly impressive picture at the moment, but the good news is there's a lot of work happening across civic society.
So Scotland's got some good examples that you tied into. What about from a global perspective? Are there some examples throughout the world that we can tag into and perhaps adopt and adapt?
Yeah, so the initiative that Glasgow City Council has announced is the result of collaboration with businesses from around the world to look at, if you look at the Advanced Forming Research Centre out beside Glasgow Airport, that's all the major airline manufacturers working together to collaborate on non-competitive aspects of production, where we can pool resources, make sure that we have a shared understanding and response to whatever the particular challenge is, and then that gets taken back into businesses and they apply their secret sauce and go on with being competitors again. So the collaborative nature of the technology park that's being proposed will be drawing on best practice from around the world.
Great, thanks very much again, Jill. I'd like to move on to Ignacio now. Ignacio, I asked Mark from Harris Tweed the question at the start, and I wanted to ask you the same one for our global retail company. So what does sustainability in fashion mean to you?
Well, now it's recent to be. I mean, we have been here for many years, and I think that part of this track record has been being sustainable as a project and understanding what are the real needs. I think that the good cooperation with academia is really to get the input of companies like us that are operating all over the world of what is reality, and trying to match reality with the science and with the capabilities of academia to really to formulate and elaborate how to behave and how to act in the future. I think that's a major role for us. I mean, as I mentioned, as an organization and having impact, we have clear lines to improve our footprint in what we are doing. First of all, by managing all the prosperity that we have generated all over the world into a new way of doing things. We are one of the first companies which is measuring consistently our Scope 3. Scope 3 means not only what you are doing or what kind of emissions you are launching to the atmosphere, but also what is your value chain doing. We have established a plan to reduce and submitted commitments with the Science-Based Targets Initiative to get and to present a plan on how to reduce it. I mean, we have committed really to get carbon neutral, to become carbon neutral by 2040, by a reduction of our direct scopes, I mean, Scope 1, Scope 2, which is our own operations, by 46.2% in 2030 on a calculus base of 2019. And our Scope 3, our indirect emissions, so the emissions of our procurement value chain, by 62% in intensity. That means per million turnover for the same with the same time frame, yes, for 2030. We have selected 2019, which is a challenging part because everybody is starting to measure in 2015 or so, because it's the first year in which we publish our first Scope 3 carbon footprint figure. So it's the only way to really to compare. And that brings me to what is really the possibilities that we have acting or behaving in the collective altogether with academia, with universities and higher education. First of all, is to share our expertise, our knowledge. We have a responsibility. We have helped to develop many countries. We have helped to develop and to get prosperity for Europe. I remind you that Europe as a whole has the 32% of the market share of the global trade all over the world, compared to the States, which are around 11 or to 12%, or China, which is around, roughly speaking, around this 11 or 12% as well, from 10 to 12%, according to the last figures. And we have to really to measure and to calculate how are we going to do that in principle. I mean, we are in the high street, we are in the mass market, as I mentioned. We have brands which are addressed to young people all over the world with urban style. We have also brands in affordable luxury, but for more mature people. And all these people have its needs, its requirements, and we really need to fulfill that. And in three major areas. First of all, design and impact. Design is how to work now with the products we are thinking for our customers in a way in which their life cycle is the better. Recycling in the textile and garment industry is hugely complicated, and we have to think in the aspect of durability. so more a temporary design, but also how a product is made, or which is monofiber, what are the components of this single garment, and how are they going to end. But also we really need people to understand the impact along the value chain. I mean, the impact in the life cycle of the product, but also the impact in the raw materials. What we are demanding to the industry, what we are demanding to the farming, on how all these things will interact in big numbers, not just in niche, small experiences or so. Second, I mean, the importance of data and analytics. It's clear that, as I mentioned, we have across our brands, Springfield, Caulfield, Pedro, Women's Secret, up to 28 million members of our loyalty clubs. And we tend to know much better about their sizing, their fitting, and the use of the garment they have. That's clear. That's really important, because when you are working and operating in an omnichannel environment, you really need to succeed in the way and the cycle of the garments. As Lindsey commented before, I mean, we cannot send 10 garments just to be tried on and get back 9 of them, if not 10, and moving them all over. So we have to really concentrate in the part. And third, I mean, the capabilities of technology for a capillary network. We are, half of our stores are, for example, in Spain, in cities of below 100,000 inhabitants. That means in an omnichannel operation, if we give the tools of our people to manage inventories, to manage the garments we have available in an efficient way, we can save a lot, because people really, in our case, in our experience, get, I mean, their purchase by, let's say, 50% of them in the store, not at home. And we have a pretty omnichannel operation, but when there are, let's say, when they bring back what they want to change or whatever, it's 70% of them choose the store to give them back and to try on another thing rather than to get them. So it's real impact on that.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ignacio. And a couple of things you mentioned there about the impact, and I'd like to turn to Richard now. And Richard, obviously we're in COP26, and I'd like to ask your view about the impact of climate change on sustainable supply chains. You're on mute, Richard, sorry.
Keep making the same mistake. Well, that's life. No, just on a lighter note, I actually have to very happily confirm that I'm on my 3rd Tweed jacket in my life. And the reason why that is happening is because the jacket didn't outgrow me, but I outgrew the jacket a couple of times. So there you go. There's still hope for more market share for Harris Tweed. Sustainability for me has been a lifelong journey, and I never stop learning about it. When you now start taking a look at the new way that we have to deal with climate impacts and how climate impacts affect global supply chains, we actually can see that we're still at the infancy of trying to understand that. You see, the whole idea of the type of organization that amfori is, which is an organization that helps members, that helps companies to perform better in the areas of sustainability, that it started all first with social impact. Basically making sure that the international labor laws, the international labor standards were applied in all of the production factories, so that we could make sure that people were getting a decent wage, that people were being fairly treated, that you did not have child labor, that you did not have forced labor. Then you go from there into now we know a lot about environmental standards. Since the 1960s, 1970s, the first Club of Rome reports that alerted Europe to the fact that they needed to do something about the environment immediately within Europe. That was the beginning really of the development of environmental standards, which made environmental impact visible and measurable. And if it's visible and measurable, you can actually change it. Now we are sitting in a new era where, again, the goalpost is shifting. And let's make no misunderstanding. Environment is not the same thing as climate. Climate is significantly different in the sense that this can go from major investment decisions, for instance, where do you locate the factory that it will not be affected by extreme weather events, to locations of factories, how far away from the markets will they be, and how much of a carbon footprint will a particular product bear in terms of transport, all the way to how do you actually get all companies to start realizing that circular and sustainable business models is the way to go. There's a lot of thinking about circularity when you start talking about large companies. I'm pretty sure that Ignacio will be able to give us a few lectures on that one. But when you start taking a look at small and medium enterprises, actually, they haven't really come to terms with that yet. There is not much knowledge being given to them on how to basically make those adjustments. It's not that they're unprepared, that they are not willing to make the adjustments. It is a fact that they wouldn't necessarily know where to begin. So how do we actually reach out with that knowledge in our value chains? And by the way, that's not just an issue of the knowledge, but it's also the language. We have to retail knowledge that amfori brings out through its academy. We have an amfori academy where we do a lot of the capacity development, a lot of the awareness raising, and we do so in Chinese, in Bangla, in various Indian languages, as well as Turkish, French, Spanish, and English. And you need to therefore make sure that there is a global understanding through global tools like an overall amfori academy, but you need to retail it at the local level. And that makes the adjustments that we're talking about also much more difficult. Finally, we haven't got agreed standards on climate change. When we start talking about, and I heard the word carbon calculators, and can we, yeah, but there is no agreed global standard for carbon calculators. There's no agreed standard for what the carbon content of a particular project will be. There is no uniform measurement of how much water cotton products take in different regions of the world. So you actually now have a problem that you can talk about climate change. There's certain things in terms of investment decisions of how factories are being set up, how circular economy is being implemented by these factories. And then there are the intangibles that quite often are at the farm level, that quite often are at the producer level, that quite often are in the small factory level that you can't measure, that you can't get to. Because we haven't developed the standards, we don't have an agreement yet we are holding producers in smaller companies, we're holding businesses in Europe, we're holding retailers accountable for coming up with climate neutral products when we actually don't really know what that means. We know a lot of things in principle. We can do a lot of things that we believe and that are immediately visible. But I go back to my journey in sustainability. I have learned new things about sustainability every year, and I'm pretty convinced that we're going to be learning a lot of new things on climate and climate change in the next 25 years. That means that the main question that you are posing concerning employability and knowledge in textile industry for me is an issue of continuous improvement, continuous development. It's not just an issue of do you get the right induction at university, but what is the follow-up, what is the follow-through, because the goalpost is not at all clear.
Thank you very much, Richard. I could listen to all of the panelists for an awful lot longer. We only had 5 minutes for each of you. Thank you very much for keeping to time as best as possible. I'd like to now go back to the audience. So there have been a few questions that have been posed already. And just to remind you, there is a Q&A box that I'd like you to pose any additional questions, and you can select the person you'd like to ask the question to. I've got a couple that have already been posted from the audience. And the first question is going to Mark. And the question is, Mark, do you think that sustainable fashion can be affordable? It's clear that sustainable brands and ethical fashion brands tend to be a lot more expensive than high street brands. Do you think there is space for cheaper, more affordable clothing that doesn't have to have a negative impact on the environment?
I think there absolutely is, but I think the key word in there is affordable, and the word that has to be removed is cheap. As a society here in the UK, and I'm sure in other parts of Europe, we became addicted to cheap clothing. And this is where there's other people in the panel that are more expert, but when it comes to consumer behaviour, I'm a great believer, coming from a farm in Scotland, that you make a decision when you're about to invest or indeed buy a product, and that is, do I want it or do I need it? And I think for too long in the UK and indeed around the world, it was, I want it, without much question of whether you needed it or not. Going back to the origins of the question though, a well-made garment will last you. It doesn't have to be made as a sustainable garment. It doesn't have to be branded as a sustainable garment. Now, I know that we're talking about fast fashion and overconsumption as well. There is quite often lots of products, particularly even that I've dealt with and I've consumed, that will last. You know, not all fast fashion will fail. It's just perhaps a concern of some people that part of the model of fast fashion is that there's an element of planned obsolescence, and perhaps, you know, you by, or indeed me, by wearing that product for 10 years, as I've done with, you know, some of the high street brands here in the UK, Topman, etc., that I do not fit into that. But importantly, it can be done. I think it has to be two things. It has to be traceable and it has to be transparent. And I think listening to the panel here, that's something that we probably all agree on. And I know Ignacio, from the conversations we had, that they're doing huge steps in that front, because by doing that, I think the whole fashion industry becomes much more accountable. And when it comes down to it, that decision, that very seismic decision of, do I want this or do I need it, becomes important before we even get to the aesthetics and the luxury of what the fashion industry is.
That's great, Mark. Thanks very much. Move on to the next question from the audience. Unfortunately, I don't have a list of who's actually posted these questions, so apologies for that, but hopefully you'll recognise your own questions. So this is for Nuria. Why, Nuria, do you think is sustainability so vital for the future of higher education?
Well, I would, reformulate the question, because I would say that higher education is vital for sustainability. Because right now, citizens are still in the process of learning what sustainability is, how to be sustainable, or why it is so important for the future generation. And we are teaching institutions. So the thing here is that engaging citizens into sustainable and green actions bring better results than just teaching them, but we know it is difficult to engage them. More if we think about all generations, and even more difficult if we think about different locations, different customs, similar problems, but not equal. So one proposal to engage citizens that UPB has, it's the creation of living labs inside our campuses. Those UPB living labs replicate local problems related to sustainability that can be studied from first-hand point of view, provoking solutions and proposing green actions to real problems. These green actions can be sized or adapted to other scenarios. Then citizens learn firsthand how to better contribute to sustainability. And that's the vital thing to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nuria. I'd like to go on to Jill now. There's a question here, Jill. Is it advisable to buy second-hand clothes, especially amidst the spread of COVID-19?
Short answer, yes. I think anyone who's tried to take anything to a second-hand store recently recognises just how secure the process is in terms of backing things up. They sit separately for a couple of days before they're unpacked, etc. But it's not just about buying secondhand. To Mark's point, reducing consumption is key. We've just done some research that shows that Scots consume 18,500 tonnes of embedded carbon per annum per person. And to live sustainably, that needs to be taken down to closer to 8,000 tonnes per annum per person. So that, that's a heck of a big transition. And so it's about reducing your consumption. And from a fashion perspective, that can be very much get in the cupboard and have a right good rummage about and see what you've got and how that could be restyled. When you're thinking of buying something, have a think, have I got something really like that? Could I borrow it for an event? Could I swap with a friend? So reducing our consumption overall has got to be core. And, I have to say my brothers howl with derision when they hear me talking about this, because I have been very guilty of not being a very conscientious consumer in the past. So, you know, if I can start to change my behaviours, then there's hope for all of us. But that, you know, buying secondhand, buying pre-loved, pre-used, borrowing, leasing, really having a good look at what you've got already and seeing if it can be repurposed. And as I say, sharing. These are all really great ways that you can actually freshen up your wardrobe, bring in new colours, try different styles without having to buy something new every time. And I just put in the chat, the Scotland's Fair Fashion inaugural meeting is happening down at the Lighthouse in Glasgow. So for anyone who's watching, leaders of sustainable fashion businesses are meeting down at the Lighthouse in Glasgow, and there may be a social event afterwards. They'll be wrapping up around 9 o'clock. So if you want to go and talk to some people who are leading in sustainable fashion in Scotland at the moment, that's a great opportunity. But really just thinking about it, think before you buy. Do I really need this, to Mark's point? Or is it just a habit that you go and buy something every week, as some people do? But conscientious consumption, reduce what we buy, has got to be the key. And guess what? It's good for your pocket as well as the planet.
I can vouch for that personally. Thanks very much, Jill. I'd like to move on to Lindsey now. Lindsey, will GCU campus in Glasgow ever offer a course specific to sustainable fashion? For example, in comparison, we do at our New York campus. And would this include industry links?
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question, Bob, because I maybe don't have the power to do that. But what I can say is it would be fantastic to be able to visit it. But you know, the fashion programs that we have at the moment embed sustainability very much within the program already. So although they're not called sustainable fashion programs, they have got a large content related to sustainability. And I'd just like to add something here, because I think that the way we've been talking and you know, being involved in the project with our industry partners as well has kind of opened my eyes to this. Is that I think this is a road we're on. It's not, you know, we have to walk before we can run. And if you imagine, like, you know, a staircase, and fashion brands are in front of a staircase, going up a staircase, and each step is a step in sustainability. You wouldn't run up a staircase 4 steps at a time, because you'd fall over and wouldn't be able to get to the top. And I think that that's a good metaphor for where the fashion industry is and how, you know, so it's approaching different areas of the product cycle, life cycle, one step at a time, and taking it that way. And just to get back to the question, it's the same for fashion programs. I think it's one step at a time. It's important to embed it, embedded already, and whether, you know, we can achieve at the end a sustainable fashion program, yes, that would be great.
Thanks very much, Lindsey. I'd like to turn to Ignacio now. And the question is, what about corruption within sustainability? How can we trust brands to be fully committed to sustainable garments and not skimping in areas they feel the consumer won't see or hear about? Should there be legislation and people monitoring this, or should it remain the organisation's job?
I think that's a huge task for the industry to afford that. First of all, really to communicate and to be transparent, honestly, in what we are doing. When we are having a program of including more sustainability in our brands or products, what we are talking about, it's raw materials, it's processes, it's impacting water, in wet processes, in in the utilization of substances which may be or not hazardous. All these things are quite, at some point in time, some of them well regulated, mostly all those which are related to environmental impact of, let's say, of wet processes, of substances and so on, and eventually in Europe about with the REACH directive, it's been quite, starts quite a good standard. Second, to communicate all these standards all over the world, I mean, really to talk in the same page, in the same language, and will also be quite impacting in the cost of goods. At the end of the day, if we want to afford a fashion which is more valuable, we have to let's say, to make it affordable but not cheap, as Mark said, if we want to sell it to the people. But affordable means not to do the cheapest in the cheapest way. It's doing affordable, and that means that put more value. And that I comes to the point of the value. We have to come back to the respect for the product itself. I do not see, I mean, a world in which fashion disappears. I do not see a world in which the need will come back to replace the need of wearing something. The need will replace the improvement in the communication of the person that fashion has mean all over the world. But something different is to recover the respect for this fashion you're wearing. If you look at architecture, if you look at design, if you look at painting, I mean, a temporary architects, designers, painters are those ones that you really think, I mean, this is modern. It was made, I mean, if you see a realistic painting of Velázquez or something from the Bauhaus in Building or Le Corbusier or whatever, I mean, there's something modern, something new in it, because it's a temporary. It will last. I mean, if we combine that with the offer we do, we cannot, I mean, reject, that, I mean, we have to maintain that way of doing things and to recover it. My chairman John Michael used to say quite often, I mean, in fashion, we have been concentrated too much in fashion and too little in strategy in the last decades. We have to eventually to make now a bit less fashion and a bit more of a strategy, or have to really reach the goals of the people and their customer. And it's, and coming back again, respect and quality. Sustainability must be in the quality perception. I mean, I remember in the early 20s, sorry, in the year 2000, and so it was really, I mean, astonishing how quality moved from intrinsic quality to qualities that you can get this, which is really on the trend, and you can get rid of it because it's not expensive, it's very cheap, you can replace it immediately. So this is quality and giving you what you want. No, I mean, this is spoiled or not children, not to boy and girl. It's not what you want, really. And that's academia has to play a role. Very interesting. I mean, educate people in respect and in better behavior on that.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. We're kind of running out of time. I'd like to bring in the last two speakers, two questions, a quick one, I guess. Richard, how much do you think a stakeholder's motive matters in making sustainable change? For example, would it be more effective for a company to have a social and environmental priority over a financial motive? Or should the focus be making things more sustainable, even if the motive is still for long-term financial gain?
We clearly see that there is a movement with certain companies indeed to take the issue at the long run, is to forgo immediate profits for long-term sustainability. These are generally the larger companies. And you can hear this in the way that let's say a company like Unilever at this moment is reflecting about its business strategy. It makes no sense to deliver a product that pollutes the environment so much that you end up killing your own customer. So there is a lot of business strategy at this moment, particularly at larger companies that are looking into these particular questions, because business wants to be sustainable, because profits have to be sustainable. And we have to be very, very clear. There is not going to be a future in which the profit motive is not going to be driving prosperity. And if we are not driving prosperity, then we will never reach the target of sustainability, which is a life of prosperity and well-being for everybody. And that's the goal. So we need to also basically see that if we actually can make sustainability profitable, the speed of implementing sustainability measures is going to be 20 times higher. Take a look at what the profit motive has created in the world. How much wealth and well-being since the Second World War in Europe. It's amazing. We've never been this wealthy. We've never been this well off. We've never been this healthy. And that's all based on the profit motive that sits within the corporations that bring the jobs, that make the money. So make sustainability profitable, solve that consumer paradox, because it's a consumer paradox of wanting to have many sustainable products for less money than they were paying for the old products. And if we can't get out of that sustainability, out of that paradox, business can't solve that on its own. It will take, as many of us mentioned, behavior on the side of the consumer, but also behavior on the side of governments to make sure that it is not just an issue of business trying to solve this and making sure the customer and governments are satisfied, but making sure that everybody plays their own role in this perspective. Yes, a sustainable future is possible. Yes, a sustainable future is possible by 2020, but it will require investment, and investment can only be generated when companies are making profit.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I'd like, we're again running out of time, so the final question is going to Greg. And this is about your PhD research. What impact and contribution to knowledge do you think your research will have on sustainable fashion, Greg?
Well, the impact that I hope to have is it really goes back to what Jill was saying about trying to educate consumers into making more responsible choices and developing strategies that would perhaps help them maybe think in a different way, and that where does the garment actually go to after they're finished with it, and try and sort of move away from this whole one night, one outfit sort of agenda that quite a lot of young millennial consumers are in at the moment. So that's the impact that I would hope to have.
Thank you very much. Well spoken there, and it's great to hear that from one of our students at Glasgow Caledonian. I cannot believe that the time has gone so quickly. I would have loved us all to have much more time to be able to explore in more detail some of these questions, and many of the questions that have been posed by the audience. Apologies if your questions have not been answered fully, but maybe there's an opportunity of getting in contact with us at SFES at Glasgow Caledonian University, and we can do our best to try and address any subsequent questions you have. What's quite clear to me is that, you know, there's not one simple solution here, and we do need to work together. We do need to work with education, with society, with organisations like Zero Waste, with the industries, retail, and looking to see how we can best manage this situation for the future for all of us. Because if we don't do that, it's quite clear that the impact that fashion can have on the environment isn't going to be good for the planet, and we obviously want to address that as best as possible. So we're bang on time for the close of this. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to thank each of our presenters. I'd like to thank Mark, Nuria, Jill, Lindsey, Ignacio, Richard, and Greg for your expert analysis, your expert answers to the questions, and from my perspective personally, for keeping to time as well. Great job, everyone. Thank you very much again, and I wish you farewell.